Help to Adjust Inc. presents If Testimony Was a Person, the podcast where we talk to professionals of all kinds about their journey and how the personal intersects with the professional. And particularly, we deal with issues of equity and inclusion. Today, we have a special guest. This person is doing something that is close to my heart, which is, she's an attorney. She is dealing with the law. She's a professor of law and a person who is community minded and has done a lot for the community, including mentoring young people. Welcome, Miss Charlene Thompson.
Thank you for having me, Don.
Yeah, it is a pleasure to have you here. So, when I did the pre-interview with you, I mean, it was particularly interesting because some people had the benefit of coming from, a long line of people in their field who kind of passed down the torch to them. And you came from a long line of apparently people who are educated in a way that we all don't get the benefit of, and that is Black people who lived the existence of knowing what farming is.
Right.
Right. So, like my parents were already in Brooklyn and
Yes.
hadn't really experienced that. But talk to me about your being raised and how it was connected to farming.
Okay. So I was born in Danville, Virginia. My mom and dad were high school sweethearts and raised in southwestern Virginia. And the wonderful thing about understanding where you come from is that, so my dad's name is Jackson and my mom's maiden name was Marable. And then when we did research about it, the farms, the lands that they still lived on were adjoining plantations. And so they were high school sweethearts. And both my grandfathers farmed, active farms. And I spent all of my summers growing up working the farm. On my mom's side, it was tobacco. And on my dad's side, it was more produce as well as, farm animals, etc. But understanding one thing that actively working on farms in the summertime showed me, how do you create something out of nothing? How do you grow and nurture things from seedlings and decide what to plant and how you nurture it until it's time for that harvest? And neither one of my parents were wealthy, but we never felt like we didn't have enough. My grandfather, my mom's dad, had 11 children, and sometimes we go ask Grandma what's for dinner. And she said, it depends on what Grandpa brings home, whether it was fish or whether it was something that he hunted that day. And so really understanding how to make your way and never feel like you are wanting for anything. We had a wonderful life. I truly enjoyed growing up, learning about farming, and also having the best of both worlds, being raised on Long Island, but then having that experience of understanding respect for the earth and growing your own and going out into the fields and pick your vegetables for dinner.
So people who have that New York orientation
Yes.
might assign thinking about the farm to sharecropping and oppression, but you actually talked about entrepreneurship connected to the farm. Talk about that a bit.
So although my grandfathers had day jobs, they were entrepreneurs and how they made additional income from farming, and had always had like a side hustle to help support their family. And that entrepreneurial spirit was ingrained in how my aunts and uncles and my sisters and I realized that we have everything that we need if we work together, support one another, and create a way, again, creating something out of nothing.
Yeah.
And we can fend for ourselves. We can create what we need to support ourselves and support our families.
So you're in fourth grade, approximately
Yes.
9 years old in Hempstead,
Yeah, at the time, actually, I lived in Roosevelt.
Roosevelt,
Yes, we were in Roosevelt at that
and
time.
during the summers you would head down
Yes.
to,
The farms, yeah,
right.
absolutely. Every summer we would go. That was our summer vacation. We'd go spend 8 weeks on grandpa's farm,
Mm-hmm.
whether it was my mom's dad or my dad's dad. We usually split the summers, and doing what we need to do, getting up before the sun got high and getting out there around 5:30, 6 o'clock, and going to do whatever we need to do in the fields, and then have breakfast. Grandma would have breakfast on the table around 7:30,
Wow.
and then we'd have a beautiful breakfast, fresh eggs from the hen house,
Mm-hmm.
fresh bacon from the smokehouse. And then we'd go out with my grandfather on my dad's side. He had a little pickup truck, and we whatever we picked from the garden that day, we'd take into town and have the ladies come out and get their produce for the day.
Yeah.
It was a wonderful experience, very wonderful memories.
Mm-hmm.
Also hard work.
Right.
Hard work. Yes.
Right. So, I imagine you learned how to use some tools and things,
Yes.
at a young
Yes,
age.
absolutely. And my dad, he has a career as a landscaper. He's 78 now, and he still does landscaping. And I take great pride in maintaining my flower beds. And I have a landscaper, but they don't really have the time and attention to do it like you want to do it. And
And
so I'm grateful.
and the fact that your dad is 78 and
Yes.
is still
Yes.
moving around doing the
Oh,
things
absolutely.
is probably a testimony to his life as a farmer, because going to the gym is a great thing, but I don't really believe it's equal to the physicality that you're involved in when you are outside,
Right.
for one, and doing that kind of what is naturally physical labor
Absolutely.
for your body, and that's
Absolutely.
wonderful.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, and so by the time you get to about eighth grade, maybe 12 or 13, you
13.
get your first job during the summer that wasn't farming. And
Right.
tell me about that.
So when I was 13, the last time I went down for the summer was I was 13. And at that time, we were really working hard. And I was like, Mom, I don't know if I want to go on the farm anymore. And she says, well, you know what? At the time, my mom was single, raising 4 girls in New York. She says, well, you're going to have to get a job then. You don't have to go, but you're going to have to get a job. And so when I turned 14, I got my working papers, and I got my first job at Turtle Hook Junior High School in Uniondale as a secretary's assistant for the summer.
You knew people in high places. How did you end up getting a job at Turtle Hook?
Again, at that time you ask and say, when school was over, I said, do you guys have any openings for positions? I want to. You ask for what you want. And Turtle Hook was 3 blocks from my house, so I wasn't trying to have a long commute, And so I just walked up the street to go to work every morning.
Okay.
I answered phones that rarely rang and filed papers that weren't too many in the summertime.
You're like a bourgeois queen. I mean, compared to
At 14,
right, compared to
absolutely, I was
farming.
rich.
Right.
I was rich. I was rich.
Getting, whatever minimum wage was back then, that was a nice feeling.
And it was a wonderful thing because again, I said my mom was a single mom raising 4 of us in New York, and we were able to go out. I was able to go out and buy all my own school clothes and supplies for school, and even give mom a little to help.
Right. Right.
And it was just something that we chose to do to help support the family.
That must have been a nice feeling.
It really was a wonderful feeling. Again, that entrepreneurial mindset,
Right.
to be able to earn money and go out and get the things that you wanted. And so I always say I'm a baller on a budget, because I don't mind working hard and working extra jobs or working over the weekend so I can have the life that I want to have for myself and my family.
Absolutely. And you graduated from what high school?
Uniondale High School.
Uniondale High
Yes.
School.
Class of 84.
And did you already know that law was something that you wanted
No,
to
so
pursue?
here's the interesting thing. I was actually a pre-med major.
Oh.
I was a pre-med major. I got scholarships out of Uniondale from like pre-med organizations, and I went to William and Mary as a pre-med major. But I'm not a fan of math, and science math-based science.
Yeah.
And so I was doing genetics and inorganic chemistry. And I realized I had an epiphany. I said, I'm going to have to do 4 more years of this. I don't know if I like it.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is a thing because my mom and dad recognized I had some gifts, and they used to give me the medical bag for Christmas presents, and say, "Oh," and they would introduce me, "Oh, she's going to be the doctor in the family." And so when I got to school, I realized, okay, was that really my dream or was that my parents' dream?
Mm-hmm.
And then I had to really had some soul searching. I said, you know what? I just went along this path because that's what my family always said, but I don't think that was my dream. So then I didn't know what I was going to do after that. But I had enough credits where I had psychology was a minor and biology was my major. So I just switched it. And I graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Psychology.
Okay.
And then I was fortunate enough to get a fellowship after that
Where were you?
at William and Mary.
Oh, William and Mary
And so there's
in
an interesting
Virginia.
story. Yes, in Williamsburg. Interesting story about that. My mom and dad didn't go to college, and I'm the oldest. So my mom was working like 3 jobs, so she really didn't have the time to help me figure out in career planning. And so I applied to 2 schools and didn't have money for the application fee. And so I wrote letters and I applied to Cornell and I applied to William and Mary because one of my classmates had got early acceptance to William and Mary. I said, oh, that seems like a nice school. Maybe I'll apply there. And so one school didn't get back to me because I didn't have the money for the application, and the other school is what I got accepted to. So that's where I went, and I had a wonderful experience
Well, you
there.
bloomed where you were planted.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I really had made lifelong friends there.
Mm-hmm.
And had a wonderful experience.
And so, going to school at first, it occurred to me when you were talking about your parents that I think that I talk about this in many of these podcasts that one, our parents sometimes just gave us what they thought was security for us, like get a city job.
Right.
You could get in the post office if I worked there, or you could work transit for New York City or something like that. And then famously, Caribbean parents want their girls to be a nurse and want their boys to, get into something where they can use their hands.
Right.
And, it sounded like your parents really knew that you had potential to do something in this professional world where you could make a difference
Right.
in that way. So that was a blessing.
Yes, it was.
But even that empowering probably gave you a little bit of confidence to know that it's not just one gift that I might have. I might have the ability to do something else even better than what my parents said. So you started looking at the law.
So I wish I had that clarity. And I was groomed to be a doctor, and then when I realized that's not what I wanted, I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was fortunate enough to get a fellowship right out of college, where it's with the Choral Foundation, where you have to do a case study of New York City. I was placed in New York City, and one of my placements was with an organization called the New York Public Interest Research Group.
Oh yeah,
NIPERG.
yeah.
And then I got hired after that internship as the youth civic education, voter education coordinator. And that was in the early 90s, 89, 90. And one of the things that we worked on was a campaign for the motor voter bill. And that was, and when you go to the DMV or any federal agency where they have the little box where you check off, do you want to vote?
Yeah.
You want to register to vote? So we lobbied New York State and the federal government to get that law passed under the motor voter bill, and we were successful. And so in lobbying in Washington, D.C. and Albany, I noticed that the Congress people, the senators, and the Assembly people, many of them were lawyers. And the fact that we got that bill passed, I was like, I like this feeling of being able to impact laws and change laws. And I was like, you know what? That's how I found my way to law, after that experience of lobbying and getting that bill passed.
That's a beautiful story because it was kind of like NIPERG, which is famous for doing little public interest things that are connected to the law, kind of gave you the interest. So how old
Yes.
were you at about that time?
Oh, you got me doing math. You know,
This
math is
is
not my favorite subject.
this is
So
graduate school
this is
age.
in 90. This was in 91. So I was 18, 19, about 20, 21, 22.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So my early 20s.
And so how long did it take you to apply to law school?
So I worked for NYPERC for 3 years.
Okay.
And that motor voter bill. And then I was like appointed to the Commission of Voting Rights by
Oh.
then Governor Mario Cuomo.
Mm-hmm.
But then in that time, I got accepted to law school. And I was grateful that I chose to go to Howard University School of Law. And that was the best decision I could have made.
Howard University.
Yeah. And
I have a good friend who is a lawyer.
Yes.
Who I always think you know because I always think all the black
Yeah.
lawyers are going to know each other.
Yes.
But her daughter just graduated Howard Law. Sorry.
That was the best decision because, coming up in our community, being smart wasn't always looked upon as, a good thing. And I kind of led a dual life. I would be one way in school and one way at home. And I didn't know how to reconcile the two sides. Even when I went to William Mary, there was only 300 of us black people on a campus of 5,000. And so I would be one way in the classroom and one way around my friends. And it wasn't until I got to Howard University that I was able to reconcile because I saw brilliant people who looked like me. And we could have debates on, rap music in one conversation and the Supreme Court cases in the next.
Right.
And so it made sense. And I was able to really reconcile it's okay to be who I am authentically, holistically, and own every aspect of myself. And that came about because I went to Howard University.
So HBCUs
Yes.
can be a way to assist young people in helping to integrate those two parts of selves, the part of self that is more intellectual and the parts of self that are social where you don't have to code switch because you're with your own folks.
And then having those foundations planted at Howard and the mindset of being a social entrepreneur and the role of a lawyer in society, the obligations that they placed upon us as we went back to our communities or different communities to be an agent of change, to be a voice for the voiceless, to be leaders in our community.
Yeah.
And like I said, that was the best decision I could have made. And it really shaped how I moved forward from that time.
Well, that's wonderful. And so you graduate from Howard Law.
Yes.
And what's the first thing you do?
So I'm going to be honest. I got offered a job at a Park Avenue law firm, making more money than I could even imagine. And in the 90s, coming out making close to six figures, having come from a single parent household. And, so I got offered that. I summered there and then got offered a position. And I worked there for almost 3 years.
You must have called dad, or your parents, let me tell you where I'm about to be working.
Well, so I'd summered there, and so they had a flavor of it already.
Oh, okay.
And so they were very, very proud. And but I also knew this was a means to an end for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I knew that this wasn't necessarily where I would land eventually, but I used that first job to learn about the law and learn to navigate and also learn some hard lessons about the role that lawyers saw black men and women at a Park Avenue law firm, going to other white shoe law firms and how they treated folks that looked like me. And I knew that this was not going to be a long-term journey, but being able to pay off all my student loans, being able to actually purchase my first home at 26 and put some savings in the bank.
Yeah.
And then after about 3 years saying, you know what, I would like to have a family. I would like to have more of a balanced life and not being ashamed to get what I needed from that assignment so I could move on to have the life that I wanted.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
it's quite admirable. I mean, were you able to see that early on? Like, I'm going to take what I need from this, and
No, not initially. I went in with the idea that this might be a great career path for me,
mm-hmm,
but I was the only black person in the litigation unit,
mm-hmm,
and I one of the things that I learned about corporate politics, job politics, is that you need to stand back and understand the dynamics of who the players are in any environment that you go in. You have to understand like what is going on. I call it we go. Like who is, if there are political camps,
yeah,
understand the dynamics, who the decision makers are,
mm-hmm,
how things get
mm-hmm,
done, who are the power bases, and who how the people move in that situation to align themselves with the power brokers within an organization. And some of those lessons were hard learned lessons. For example, I found that the young white attorneys would go and hang out with the partners after work and go drinking with them. And then they ended up with the best assignments.
mm-hmm,
And that's not something, I was going back to Long Island. I wasn't trying to hang out in the city
yeah,
after work, working on 10, 12-hour days.
mm-hmm,
But that was a hard lesson that I had to learn.
right,
And also, when I got my critique, one of the critiques I got was, "Oh, you're too nice." I was like, what does that mean? But in that environment, they wanted you to come across as a shark.
yeah,
They wanted the opposing counsel to know that you would not be pushed over. And my personality was more like, let's figure this out together.
mm-hmm,
I have a client to represent, and we can come up with something mutually beneficial for our clients, and more like a mediation type person rather than that really going for the
mm-hmm,
jugular. And
mm-hmm.
so I came to realize that my personality was not necessarily the best fit for that environment. And
Famously, women um, are usually more consensus building
yes,
than tramplers of
yes,
other people in the work world. And so that's interesting that you experienced that up close and personal, that,
yes.
oh, they don't really embrace that, you know.
But I learned to use that going forward, that lesson going forward, not to change who I was, but to change how I navigated to get what I needed
Mm,
for myself and my clients and my family. Because what people see as a weakness, if you understand the dynamic going in, you can then flip it to make it a strength.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so that's what I learned to do. That was a difficult lesson in the beginning to learn, but I'm glad I went through that to understand. And then I share those stories to other people, other young attorneys. So they say, well, you know what? Maybe I'm going to go hang out with the partners tonight.
Right.
And so they understood. I share those stories and lessons that I learned for other people to make maybe different choices.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so after leaving the corporate world,
hmm
where do you go?
So I landed a job at a children's book publishing company as a contracts manager. I actually
Mm.
went to Long Island and was there for 6 years.
So you had children during this
Not
time, or?
I so I got married right after I left the law firm. I got
Oh,
married,
okay.
and my little one came along like almost right away. We were expecting 3 months into the marriage, and so I had my first child, Justina, while at the children's book publishing company, and I was grateful for the local commute. And then the company grew, that they relocated back to Manhattan. And
Uh,
so I had to commute again.
yeah, right,
Yeah.
right.
And so then I did that for a couple of years until my son came along, he was born in March of 2001. And so I worked in the city until February, and then I decided, okay, I need to go back to Long Island because I'm not trying to commute with 2 kids and a husband, and so I made a deliberate decision to try to find a job either in academia or in government, because I believe that that would afford me the flexibility and the lifestyle to be able to manage all aspects of my life, being
Yeah.
a mom, a wife. We were definitely a two-income household. And it's a lot when you are expected to navigate and manage all of that, being a co-breadwinner, being the primary caregiver for your children and managing a household was a lot.
Oh yeah.
And so I was able to end up landing a job with the county in 2002 and spent, yeah,
Nassau County.
Nassau County and their, what was then called the Office of Housing and Intergovernmental Affairs.
Mm-hmm.
And then later they became the Office of Community Development, which is what they're known
I
as
see.
now.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that for 10 years.
So that must have been the perfect, well, I'm imagining it could have been a perfect balance for you because you can kind of take your social consciousness and love for your community into work and still work hard without feeling that you're just fighting other people's battles.
You're absolutely right. And you know what was interesting about that? I learned how, so the agency I worked for was HUD funded. Money from HUD came into the agency and then was distributed to our communities. And what I found, unfortunately, at the time is a lot of the money was brought in based upon our demographics in our communities, but the money didn't flow back to our communities at the same rate. And so I became a student of government, understanding how money flowed in and how money flowed out and all of the regulations of how different communities became eligible to receive money. And then I make sure I was able to get seats at the table where the decision making was made upon the flow of money, and worked in the community to make sure our community-based organizations were well equipped to receive the money. And so when the decisions were made to allocate the money, I said, well, let's try this community-based organization. And I said, well, they'd never received grant money before. I said, what if I work with them very closely and make sure they spend it right? And if they need technical assistance, I'll help them. And in playing that role in government, I was able to make sure many of our community-based organizations that might have been overlooked really had an opportunity to partake in the funds that were flowing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was my greatest accomplishment and being in that seat. I feel to help grow our community-based organizations and give them the tools that they need to partake.
Without even knowing that world very well, I would, it sounds wonderful because it's one of the biggest problems that across the board, I would say, in with monies that are to help communities of color.
Right.
That the monies end up not really going to exactly the things that they're supposed to, and the people who are really supposed to benefit don't, by and large, and not the people who are benefiting from the money. So to have we had someone on the inside,
Absolutely.
so to speak.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Because the thing I realized is that the people who were running the different agencies they'd share the information and how to get the grants with the people that they wanted to share with.
Right.
And so it's like a public secret almost. And we weren't privy to that information as to what were the qualifications to get the money, how do we apply, what do we need to make sure that we have in our structure, in our organizational leadership and dynamics and protocols to make sure that we could partake.
It's like an old boys network with public money. Yeah, no, I respect that face because it is outrageous.
Yeah.
So you were there helping with that, which is great.
Yeah, and not only that, so subsequently in 2018, I was appointed as a commissioner for community development for the Incorporated Village of Hempstead.
So you go from, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but kind of being legal counsel within the housing and urban development,
Right.
from becoming a commissioner, which is like a position of leadership that you hadn't had before that time.
So in the Office of Housing and Intergovernmental Affairs, or also Community Development, I was like a deputy director, and we oversaw different communities and how money flowed to make sure that the communities are compliant with the use of the money, et cetera, and reported back to HUD. And then I transitioned due to political transition. That's how I started my company, Thompson Economic Development, and I did that from 2010 to 2017. and did very well. I actually did the same kind of work that I did for the government on under my consulting firm, and had clients like Hofstra University, the Entrepreneurship
Oh,
Assistance Program, and my anchor client was the New York State Housing Trust Fund Corporation.
okay.
And I again learned how money flowed. And after that, I transitioned into being the commissioner of the Office of Community Development for the Village of Hempstead, which is the largest incorporated village in New York State,
Yeah.
and one of the largest is in the nation. Um, which has about 70,000 residents, although it says about 56 officially, but a lot of them are undercounted. And being a community with a significant population of poverty, about 1 in 5 families live in poverty in the village of Hempstead. And so that was an anchor way that allowed the HUD money flow to our community. And so I was a commissioner, head of the Community Development Agency for 4 years. And in that time, I took great pride in working closely with the community-based organizations to elevate them to be able to partake in a meaningful way in getting the grants money
Right.
that was flowing to the village. And one of the things I always stressed is we are better when we work together. We can get more money if we work together rather than uh, organizations fighting over crumbs.
Mm.
If we build alliances and work together, we can really get whole pies.
Right. This is what we need.
Exactly.
And my organization and these 4 organizations are standing united that this is what we're hoping to get.
Getting 6+ figures rather than getting 10,000 here
Right.
or 5,000 here. We can get $100,000 if we work together.
Right. And everybody, instead of everybody kind of being like, we got $12,400,
Right.
we got this, we got that,
Right.
and everyone's separate.
Especially when COVID money rolled in.
Mm.
Because then they had money that they had to figure out where to put. And when you had built these coalitions and saying, we can manage the money, we can work together, we can be accountable for the money you've given us, now we're ready to add another zero. When COVID,
Right.
and when they needed a place to find that COVID money to land, we worked on building up the organizations from the community, from the ground up, to make sure that they had the systems in place to be able to access government money and manage government money in a way that they can report back without getting into trouble or misallocating funds.
Right.
And so teaching them, if you want government money, always comes with strings. And so we're going to teach you how to navigate and build your organization to get that money as it flows in. And that was like my greatest pride, my greatest joy of being able to help.
I can imagine. That's
Yeah,
that's
it
good
really
stuff.
was.
So I'm going to shift gears a little bit now. I know
Okay.
you have 2 children.
Three.
3 children.
3.
And when I did the pre-talk with you to this interview, I was kind of impressed that you came from a family that seemed to have some social consciousness, and it seems that you've been able to, well, maybe you get some of the credit or a lot of the credit, but I want to know your perspective on, because your kids kind of went into careers where they're doing socially conscious work,
Right.
and I wanted to know your perspective about that.
And so my life philosophy is always that we're here. It's an underlying, I'm a woman of faith. And so I truly believe that we are placed here for a divine purpose. And as a parent, part of my role, one of my key roles is when you have children is to help them figure out what their divine purpose here as they walk this earth. And so that's a philosophy, a fundamental philosophy that I talk to my children about. We are created for a divine purpose. And so my oldest daughter, again, going back to farming, her first job was at a farmer's market in Roosevelt. And that being her first job, she went off to undergraduate Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, where she started off as a biomedical engineer, but switched to a dual major of society and design and sustainability. And one of the things she studied is how do you grow food like hydroponically. And so then she went on to get her master's at University of Pennsylvania and master's in education. But her job in Philadelphia, she worked at an urban farm in North Philadelphia. and growing herbs and vegetables. And then they would have farmers market, and they would also have a food exchange where they would go and distribute the produce to the neighbors in Philadelphia, Northwest Philadelphia. And out of that, she ended up landing her second job as let me try to get the title, as the program strategist for environmental justice for the city of Philadelphia.
Oh, wow.
And then she
Environmental justice, program strategist
for environmental justice for the entire city of Philadelphia. Wow. And she does community engagement and talking about brownfields and food deserts and how they go about being impactful. And again, that was something, my philosophy as in raising my children was, we are stewards here. How do we give back? How do we make a difference in our community? And I think being my oldest, she got it early and often and would work with her younger brother and sister to talk about, we have responsibility as stewards for the time that we're given here on this earth to make sure we leave it better than we found it. And my middle child, my son, who's coming home tonight, he's a senior at the University of Hawaii, and he's studying marine biology, and he wants to look at how alternative energies like wind farms impact marine life, particularly large mammals and whale migration patterns and their feeding patterns. And then we have my youngest.
So wait, your son, is he still in college at Hawaii?
He's a senior at the University of Hawaii.
Did you call him in his freshman year and say, like, you better not be at these luau's, boy. You need to be at class?
No, so my son, his mindset has always been, I'm handling my business.
Okay.
I'm about getting my degrees. And so he's always put schooling, and he has a joy of learning.
How did he end up in Hawaii, though? This is interesting.
Because, so since he was a little boy, he always had a fascination with ocean life. But one of the things I did with my kids, we'd give them in their stockings gift cards to Barnes & Noble. And then we'd take their gift cards and go book shopping. He would always get books on marine life and whales. So he knew he was interested in that. And even going all through high school, he knew he wanted to be a marine biologist. And so when we were looking at schools, he was interested in Duke and the University of Hawaii. He got accepted to both. But when we went to visit Hawaii, he fell in love with the island.
Okay. And
they have their own island for research, and he said, this is where I want to be.
And what city is the university in?
Oahu.
Oahu. Okay.
Yeah, it's on the island of Oahu, and Manoa is the city.
Okay.
Yes. And so he's a senior now, and he's coming home. He'll be doing actually a remote internship on whale migration patterns and feeding patterns because of global warming, how their feeding patterns have changed.
That's wonderful. I mean,
yes.
It's so good to hear. Well, first of all, it's one thing to make the decision to go into great fields, but it's also speaks to the fact that there was no shortage of exposure, that they found their way into stuff that might not be the typical,
yes.
I'm going to be a teacher, I'm going to be a fireman, they found their way into important work that is, it may not be right in front of everyone's face, but if you are in the right rooms and hearing the right people,
yes.
you learn about this stuff. And I want to hear about your third, but we have to get also to what you've been doing in the past, let's say 5 years. But
okay, so quickly with my youngest daughter, she is a behavioral technician working with autistic children. Yes, and so she works here. She's working in Nassau County, and she works in facilities that works with these, like if they are in group homes or group housing setting, she'll work with them overnight or during the day.
Like
she
that,
also provides behavioral skills, life skills for them as well.
That's beautiful.
And so she's enjoying that. The last 5 years. So in the last 5 years, again, after transitioning out of being commissioner I transitioned in 2021 from being commissioner of the Community Development Agency.
Okay.
Again, I still always had my consulting firm and always worked with organizations like the Long Island African American Chamber of Commerce and Urban League of Long Island on equity and social justice issues, and making sure that we get our fair share in these economic opportunities that are rolling through the region. Unprecedented alignment of federal funds, state funds, local funding, uh, to make sure that we don't get left out of the conversation and that we are in a situation where we can be prepared in our community in our businesses to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming down from the federal government.
Absolutely.
And there's more work that we need to do for our community-based organizations, for our businesses, to make sure that we're ready to take advantage of these different opportunities.
Yeah.
And most recently, since February, have been fortunate enough to be appointed as a deputy county attorney for the County of Nassau and their family court, which is a new position for me. And then I'm finding ways. A lot of us are not familiar with a lot of the difficult things and challenges that may be faced in our communities. So understanding how to navigate that and support families that may need additional support and guidance, and young people as well who might have lost their way. And in addition to that, always maintaining my ability to contribute to different community-based organizations as a legal advisor or helping develop strategies to access opportunities for our business owners and our community-based organizations.
Yeah. We need, we as a community need people in all walks of life that are our advocates. And, I really want to say thank you to you for being such a person and throughout your professional career. It is important work. Any last words before we get ready to sign off?
Just going back to something I said before, again, from a foundation of faith, we have to be stewards with the time that we're giving here. And I believe that we're all created for a purpose. And there's no better joy than when you realize you're walking in your purpose and fulfilling the destiny for which you were created. And so being able to recognize that in the people that you meet and how you give back, how you leave footprints to make whomever and whatever you touch better by you having been there.
Absolutely.
That's how I choose to live my life.
Absolutely. And it really shows by the choices that you've made and your children have made. Charlene Thompson, JD, and we didn't even get to the fact that you teach law at Hofstra and probably have affected many of the young people who are lawyers now and will be lawyers in the next few years. So that, again, that's wonderful. If people would like to contact you about, as deputy of, as deputy counsel in Nassau County, if they would like to talk to you, consult with you, anything, how do people reach you?
So the best thing to do, I still have my consulting firm,
right?
Thompson Economic Development.
Right.
And so if they have questions or want to reach out to me, that's the best way to do so through, I have a website, www.thompsoneds.com, or you can reach me via email. My first initial is C, last name Thompson, at thompsoneds.com.
Wonderful. If testimony was a person, Ms. Charlene Thompson, we appreciate you, appreciate your presence here. Like, share, subscribe, and we will connect soon. Peace and love.